Are you feeling creatively burned out? You used to feel alive with new ideas, but stress and exhaustion have squeezed the creative juices out of you, leaving you feeling uninspired and convinced you have nothing left to contribute to the world. As entrepreneurs, creativity is at the core of what we do. But when we're so focused on serving others, we often neglect our own creative well-being. But this struggle ends today. Allow me to introduce you to Zafira Rajan. Zafira is a copywriter, sensory storyteller, and brand strategist who helps entrepreneurs unblock their voice, harness their creative energy, and write sensory stories that connect with their audience. This conversation with Zafira will help you unblock your creative voice and recommit to creative practice, vital elements on your quest to become deeply rested. This conversation was originally recorded for my fundraising event, the Rest and Success Code. Zafira inspired me to reconnect with my creative spirit, and I have no doubt that she's about to help you do exactly the same. Enjoy this deeply rested conversation with Zafira Rajan. Welcome to Deeply Rested, the podcast that helps people doing good work in the world take incredibly good care of themselves. I'm your host, retired therapist and disillusioned business coach, Megan Megginson. I'm on a mission to help people like you unlearn the rules that keep you trapped in self-doubt so that you can recover from burnout and finally become deeply rested. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and join our weekly newsletter at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. Now, it's time for the show. Zafira, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I am very excited about this conversation today. And before we dive in, I just have to tell our listeners how you and I met, because it is such a fun story. Zafira and I were both in New York City for the launch of Laura Belgray's book, Tough Titties. And we were at the same fancy New York City networking cocktail hour party thing, and we were both kind of wandering around the room, and I just felt so magnetically drawn to Zafira. So I went up, introduced myself, and almost immediately we started talking about creativity, right? We were talking about writing, we were talking about fiction and the books that we're reading, and I just feel like we went from 0 to 60, and the rest of the evening, creativity was all I could think about. So of course I had to invite you to talk about creativity. And I'm so happy that you're here. I can't wait for this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's totally the best description of how we met. The magnetism was mutual. And we've continued those conversations ever since. So I'm glad we get to sit down and do an in-depth version right here.
Well, and I love how we do very different things in our businesses, but our work centers around creativity and helping people reconnect with their voices, reconnect with their creative selves. That's why I want to start this conversation. I want to hear your thoughts on why we're even needed. Right? Meaning, why are so many business owners struggling with creativity in the first place?
Yeah, and that's a beautiful question, a big question, which I have multiple answers for. The first one that I can think of, especially since I see it happen a lot inside my private communities, is I feel like we are really distracted nowadays, and we have a lot swimming into our field at all times. And when we want to decompress, we also reach for those same distractions, that our desire to consume really starts to outweigh our desire to create.
Our desire to consume outweighs our desire to create. I just had to repeat.
Yeah, and it can be easier, right? I mean, it's much easier to consume than it is to actually go out and carve out that space to create the things yourselves. But sometimes we are also often pressured to produce, and the creativity part really starts getting chipped away, especially when we're used to feeding a content cycle that can be unhealthy, especially if we feel like we have to show up in so many different places, but that's not really where we would like to be showing up all the time. And our creative energy is getting channeled into so many different areas, and they just don't end up serving us. But the tail end of that is also we are constantly comparing ourselves to others all the time as we're sitting there and consuming, the reel from this person or the email from that person. And it can be so easy to fall into the trap of like, well, everyone else is doing this thing so well, so why bother? Or, does what I have to say really matter? So I think it's just this constant cycle of like overwhelm and distraction and mindset sometimes that can really hold us back, especially when we're already mostly in survival mode sometimes, right? And we're just trying to get through the next month or just trying to get through the next week. It's such an easy thing to backbench your creativity. There's never a real urgency for it. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, there's always something else to do.
Absolutely.
Okay. You just said so many really big things, really important things. We're like 2 minutes in and my mind is already blown. This is an excellent sign for what's to come. Right. I mean, that just saying alone, like the desire to consume is greater than the desire to create is really powerful. I'm going to be thinking about that for a very long time. We're so busy that we are just kind of in survival mode, right? Stress management, trying to check the items off of our to-do list. These are all things that rob us of our innate creativity, of the time to be creative. I want to add just a couple more into this mix, if you're okay with that.
I would love to know.
Okay, great. Yeah, things that I talk about a lot with my clients are really. I like talking about systemic forces. If you know me, I can't go through one conversation without talking about the patriarchy or capitalism. But the patriarchy really shows up, especially for women, when it comes to creativity, that we're so conditioned that we need to be in service of others, that over our lifespans, we really do lose connection with that deepest, wisest part of ourself. And I think that that's where most of our creativity comes from, is this really deep core inner wise woman that lives here in my, like in my belly. If I don't have connection to her, even if I do sit down and make the time to be creative, it can feel really hard for me to know what to say, to know how I want to express myself. So I think everything that you said feels so true. And then just like layering on top of that, feeling disconnected from my creative spirit, feeling like I don't have the time or space to tend to myself, or I have a fear of being seen. I don't want to be selfish. I don't want to take up too much space. There's so many reasons why business owners might be disconnected from their creativity.
Absolutely. And I knew I was going to save the patriarchy for you to chat about that.
Thank you so much. So kind. So kind.
I'll let you have that one. But I think you're right. And it is so sad when you describe it in that way, right? It feels like sad. A friend that you're neglecting. And it's also, I want to acknowledge that it is also totally normal to disconnect from creativity. And sometimes we feel so bad about it that then it becomes such a mission to reconnect. And then we put pressure on that. But creativity definitely comes in cycles, and I think it's also okay when that's the case. And just knowing how to channel it, and when the right time to channel it is more important than sitting in the guilt that you're not producing all the time.
And that feels like a really important distinction that you're touching on. That there's creating content for our businesses, let's say, and then there is being creative as a human who lives on this planet. And there's overlap for sure between those two things, but they're not the same. I'm curious, how do you define creativity? When people come to you saying that they feel creatively blocked or they want to be more creative, what does that mean to you?
Ooh, that is such a good question. How do I define creativity? I feel, for me, my version of that is feeling alive with new ideas. Like new ideas have just like seeped into my skin, and I'm just like waiting. I'm like so excited to put them into action. And it's something that feels, sometimes creativity to me can feel urgent sometimes when it's like, if we don't capture this the way it is in your brain right now, we might lose it. And so I've also gotten used to like bookmarking my creativity and making sure I don't lose the essence of it if I can't tend to it right away. But it's that feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting to me and this means so much to me that I want to prioritize it and I want it to be front and center right now. And a real life example of how that's playing out in my own life right now, we are just chatting before this that the next 2 months are very full and busy. And at the same time, I have been really focused on a creative project of my own, which is writing my book. And it would seem otherwise impossible to fit that into what feels like a really heavy schedule that I have right now. But I was like, I'll wake up at 5 and just get an hour in every day. And that is honestly the happiest hour of my day, even if I'm sleepy. And that's an example of when I'm feeling creative. And that's what it looks like for me. It means I'm making the space to tend to it. And it's access to that stream of consciousness that is really like brimming and feels alive. Yeah. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's how it feels, I guess.
Then it's a perfect answer. And everyone's answer should be different, right? Like we should not all define creativity in exactly the same way. It's like, what does it mean to you? How do you feel when you are really tapped in to your creative self? And I wish people could see your face right now when you're talking about the way you feel when a new idea comes to you. It's like your whole color changed. It's like there's a glow, there's an inspiration that is just oozing out of your pores. And I love feeling that in my body, that I am in my creative spirit when I can feel that there is something trying to emerge from the core of my soul. Something is like trying to be born through me. And that is such a different feeling than, okay, today I have to do 2 Instagram posts and 1 blog post, and I want to make sure they're SEO optimized, or I've got to write an email to my newsletter. Like those are creative practices too. But I think what we're trying to get into today is that deeper core essence, the intuitive creativity that comes to us instead of us going to it.
Totally. And I think the distinction right there is in the language you just used, which is I have to, right? And I think when we're feeling really embodied in our creative in our creative spirit, we start saying I want to instead. And that on its own can be such a huge distinction with how you approach the work and how you open up your mind to receive all the things you want to be channeling through it.
Okay, so now that we know why so many business owners are creatively blocked, we could have a whole series of conversations about that alone. And we know that the definition of creativity is different for all of us, but that it's something very embodied. I would love to hear your thoughts, Zafira, about how we can reconnect to our creative spirits when it feels like we've really lost connection to that part of ourselves.
I have so much to say on this, and I'm going to just condense it as best as I can. So the first thing I will say that I kind of touched on already is having that awareness to begin with, to see what season and cycle of life you're currently in. And creatives by nature are not constantly creating. Otherwise, we would just all burn out. In fact, most of us are probably already creatively burnt out right now. And acknowledging, whether it's time for rest, is it time to apply pressure? Is it time to tend to that idea that's just like bugging you and it just wants to come out, just like how I'm feeling right now? And also acknowledging that the conditions for creating are never perfect, but if it's something that has felt challenging for you before, the best first step is to just create as much white calendar space as possible. And I'll tell you why. I want to backtrack a little bit. If anyone listening is interested in creativity, they've probably read Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic before. And there's something that she mentions in that book that has always really stuck with me. So for thousands of years, people actually used to believe that inspiration was outside of us. And both the Greeks and the Romans used to believe that creative people had like an external spirit of creativity that lived in the walls of their creative spaces. And they would just pop out and come and help you in your creative endeavors. So there's something to be said about maybe mentally taking the pressure off and envisioning yourself collaborating with ideas that are floating around you every day instead of being the sole source of it. But the reason that I mentioned that is like when you create space, you also create opportunity for ideas and creativity to come to you more naturally. And there's a reason we get great ideas in the shower. There's a reason we feel inspired when we go on a walk. The best way to feel creative or get new ideas is actually to not go looking for them at all, but to simply give yourself open space so that they can breathe and arrive. And in order to be creative, you also have to operate from a space where you can execute. And that's why recognizing what cycle you're in is really helpful, right? And if we're operating in reactionary mode, we'll just miss those opportunities. And an example might be the difference when I take my dogs on a walk with my phone versus without it, right? I'm probably going to miss the details that might inspire me to write later or make me feel called to draw or sketch something. And the number one thing that I have been really sticking to recently, I read about it in The Act of Creativity by Rick Rubin,
I was
is
just thinking about that book right now.
yeah, there's something in there he said. We're so connected. Look for what you notice that no one else sees. And I think that is always the biggest clue as to what you creatively feel called to do or feel inspired by. And those are things to pay attention to. There's a million books in the library, right? And that's because all the authors paid attention to something no one else was seeing or wanted to tell stories no one else was telling. There's enough ideas to go around if if we have that antenna up. And so keeping that in mind, I think is really useful if you want to reconnect to your creative spirit, which is just take a beat and pause and just look for what you're noticing. And what you might do with that, it's totally up to you. Maybe when you're creative cycle, you're ready to execute it. Maybe when you're in your rest cycle, you can think about it some more. And if you want to really, really, really easily figure out what will most reconnect you with your creative self, the best teacher, I think, is the childhood version of you. So whatever 11-year-old Megan used to like doing, or 10-year-old Zafira used to like doing, or enjoyed losing themselves in, are likely to be the same things that you want to immerse yourself in now. So if you're always drawn to watercolors, for example, that's a great way to reconnect with your creativity. Or maybe my brother was like an aspiring little chef and he used to spend hours perfecting this one meringue. Like I've eaten so many meringues in my life. And if I was to tell him to do that today, he would drop everything with no hesitation and go do that right now. Or maybe it was photography. And for me, it was always reading a book and feeling inspired to write stories about Maria the Mermaid. I was really obsessed with her. But even at 10, that same principle was true, which is unknowingly, we had created space, right? And unknowingly, we were looking around the world with innocence, with fresh eyes. We were looking for what no one else was seeing. And we didn't compare ourselves to anyone else. And we didn't let, other distractions deter us as kids. We just did it because it was fun. And I think at the root of it, that's probably something I should have included in my answer, which is being creative should ultimately feel fun. It should feel like a good time, right?
It shouldn't feel like, work, or
exactly.
like, you said it earlier. It's not I have to do this. It's I want to do this. I want to play. I want to express myself. You are just full of so much wisdom, Zafira. I almost forgot I was recording an interview just now and I was just like nodding along, listening. I keep a picture of my 7-year-old self in the case with my laptop. And it's like this really goofy picture of me like on the floor and my hair is all splayed out. I'm missing my 2 front teeth. And there's just a joy in my eyes that I have to like look at her. When I was saying earlier about like the wise self who lives inside of my belly, like that's actually the picture of her that I imagine. And there's so much wisdom in what you're saying. When I get swept into the day to day, when I get swept into what I'm supposed to be doing for my business, um, I lose connection with that part of me that intuitively knows what she wants and why she's here and what she has to say. So I think that's such beautiful advice to reconnect to your inner child. And this advice to create space feels so powerful and such a core part of the rest and success message, that you need space to be creative. You need space to rest. There's also an element in what you're sharing, Zafira, that really taps in to self-trust for me, right? Like these things that you're saying about noticing the signs, and obviously the fact that we were both thinking about Rick Rubin's book at the same time. Like if you don't have that yet, buy yourself a copy. I love it. It's like each chapter is like 2 to 3 pages, and you can just, it's like a little meditation almost. You can just read it and then just hold it and think about it for as long as you need. Um, but there's this element of being aware and noticing and creating space that requires that you trust yourself, that you trust the little inklings that you feel, that you trust the ideas that are coming to you, the ideas that are asking to be born. Don't let your mind override the little intuitive pings. Do you have any thoughts about that, about where self-trust fits into the equation for reconnecting with your creative spirit?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and probably also one of those reasons why so many business owners feel blocked is because they override that self trust,
Yeah.
right? And they start to doubt whether it's worth pursuing, whether it's worth anything. And I never thought about it that way, which was, yeah, you really do have to trust that those pings are trying to tell you something. And I think for me, over time, this has become something I have to practice, right? And I like a muscle. And I have to practice it and trust that what I'm feeling really matters,
Yeah.
and not to be dismissive around it.
Right.
And also to take risks, right?
Mhm.
Over the last year, I've taken creative risks purely for fun. And what I have noticed is that the execution feels so easy because I'm not attached to an outcome.
Mm.
And so I think when we have trust, we also then can give into the fun of it. Or if you want to trust yourself and take the pressure off, don't attach it to an outcome. And I think that can help so much more with getting into the flow and really rolling with it rather than letting it be something that passes you by. I think there was something else in Rick Rubin's book that was like, ideas are everywhere and they try to find their person. And if it's not for you right now, it'll float along to someone else and maybe it'll be their time to execute it. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that is also
The
annoying.
idea is going to find a way to come into the world.
Exactly. And so whether that's through you or someone else, again, awareness and timing and knowing if this is your time to bring it to life is really important. And it's hard. Self-trust is really hard.
Oh, it's the
especially
hardest.
when, there is no outcome and we are so used to wanting instant payoff on things and instant gratification. And we love a dopamine hit, like, all the likes and shares on our posts and replies. Like we're used to that live feedback loop. And when you're in the weeds creating, you do not have that.
Yeah.
And so it can be really challenging with how we're conditioned nowadays in terms of the creative process.
Well, we're conditioned to hand our power away, right? To it's like, okay, I'm going to give it to my coach. I'm going to give it to my biz bestie. I'm going to give it to my mastermind group. I'm going to give it to my therapist. Like we're just full time almost. We're just walking around abdicating our power and authority to other people, looking for answers externally. And what I love about the way you're talking about creativity is that it's a very internal process. You create space to be with yourself. You create opportunity for ideas to come to you. And then you really deepen a relationship with your inner child, with your inner wise person, however you refer to them. And you let the inspiration come from within instead of waiting for good ideas to come to you from someone else.
Yes. Yes.
Feels
Exactly.
that feels really important. And creating space, that if you can't create space, this isn't going to happen. There is no reality where you can work a 60-hour work week and tend to your kid at night and be in relationship with your spouse and your, best friend. And then creativity presents itself to you. Creativity requires space. So I just want to emphasize that point that you made a few minutes ago, that if you want to reconnect with your creative spirit, you have to prioritize creating space in your life, on your calendar, to be still, to listen, to receive whatever messages are finding their way to you.
Totally. It's so important. And it doesn't have to be a specific activity or a specific anything. I used
Yeah.
to have a do nothing hour
Yeah, just
on
sit
my
down.
calendar for a while. Yeah, where it's like, let's just see what happens. And
Mhm.
if also nothing happens, but you just relax, that's okay. The next time you
Yeah.
sit down to do it, your mind is going to be automatically at ease because it knows you're not expecting anything of it. And you can let those ideas drop in.
Yeah, it's how I work with my clients who are developing deep rest practices. That for me, deep rest is anything you do that connects your mind to your body and regulates your nervous system. And it might be sleep, it might be laying down, it might be dancing, it might be jogging, it might be painting, it might be playing with your kid, it might be journaling. It literally doesn't matter what it is. And for me, it's often different every day. Like the type of rest I need to just soothe my system and to allow my creative self to emerge, it looks different all the time. But what doesn't change is the need for space. If I'm not creating the space, it's not going to happen. I want to move us forward because I'm very excited to talk about your 3 tips to unblocking your voice and discovering your inner writer. So, specifically talking about if you're someone listening who's interested in developing a writing practice, Zafira has some really concrete tips that you can take away today to bring that part of you more into the world. So, Zafira, what's tip number 1?
Tip number 1 is developing a writing ritual. So this is no surprise. We know folks like famous authors have always had writing rituals that vary quite widely. And I think that we all owe it to ourselves, to be honest, to develop a ritual for creativity in some way. And for me, with writing in particular, I know that can feel really challenging for a lot of people to stick to a practice or to see the meaning in it. But we all feel the urge and we know it's important. So the best way I can advocate for a writing ritual is to say it really is like warming up a muscle and to prime your mind and your creativity for what's next, just like laying out gym clothes to go for a workout, right? It should feel nourishing. It should fill your cup. It should remind you how good it feels to just do the thing, even if it feels like it took a monumental effort. And over time, writing rituals become habits, which are 2 different things. Rituals and habits are 2 different things. And then habits become flow. And they offer something for you to return to ground you, and are just a reminder of like what brings you into balance. So creating a writing ritual can look like so many different things. For me, for example, lately in this season of life, like I mentioned, I'm waking up early in the morning, I'm lighting a candle, I'm reading for a bit, and then I'm just writing for a couple of, maybe it's like half an hour. That's it. That's my writing ritual in this season of life. The best way to think about what works for you is what gets you into a state of like productivity really easily. Are you someone that like needs a cup of coffee before they sit down and do something? Are you someone that really thrives on like getting extra energy out, like exercising before paying attention to, something creative? Do you need a quiet space? Do you thrive on the white noise of like a cafe? Just knowing like what conditions are already optimal for you to do your best work are going to be what's easiest for you to lean into in terms of writing itself.
I love
And
the permission for the ritual itself to be whatever you want it to be.
exactly. And it should be, right? Like, if writing is something that already feels overwhelming, all the steps before don't also need to be overwhelming. And
Right. Yeah.
they
Embrace
don't need to be
simplicity.
perfect.
So
Yeah,
embrace simplicity, but commit. Pick
exactly.
something and commit. That's what I'm hearing here. That is like the real takeaway for me.
Yeah. And by commitment, I don't even mean you don't even have to do it every single day. Maybe you can even start by like one Sunday morning or night a week, and then you build it up over time. But just be realistic, I would say,
Right.
is the other one, because then you are setting yourself up for potential failure. And when that happens, you'll give yourself an excuse to not do it again because you'll tell yourself it never worked out the first time. So make it is so easy.
Make it so easy. And I love the use of the word ritual, establish a ritual. It's reminding me of something a spiritual mentor said to me once. And I was basically talking about how I can get so frustrated with myself when I have a ritual and I want to stick to it and I don't. And she said, Megan, remember, this is about devotion over discipline. And this isn't about disciplining yourself to do the right thing and to check the boxes and to be productive. This is about approaching this practice with devotion. And that little reframe in my own mind, like really intentionally moving away from something as a discipline and really stepping into it as a devotional practice, has made it a lot easier for me to sink into the ease and the regularity of showing up and doing it. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix because it's just been so helpful.
I love that so much. I feel like even the tone shift in that was like, you go from one that's like mired in expectation
Right.
and like a little bit of guilt to one that's like, this feels really good.
Yeah,
This feels
it's
warm and fuzzy.
coming from love, not coming
And love.
from a should, I'm supposed to do this. Okay. So step
Yes.
1, we're going to establish the ritual. Step 2, what are we doing next?
Yes. So this is something I have been experimenting with for a while and can 100% say it works really well. You are no stranger to this strategy, but I think experimenting with various levels of resetting your nervous system before you sit down to write is
Yes.
extremely helpful. And again, I think that's just another signal to your brain that we're about to do this thing and they're ready for it.
Yeah.
But also it allows you to, meet you wherever you're at in the moment, whether that's to just like expel excess energy, whether that's to calm nervous energy that's like percolating, whether it's to just reconnect with yourself. If you have like locked yourself in a room to write and there was like, crazy toddler running outside your door, as is often my reality. And a couple of my favorite nervous system resets are really, really simple. The first one is just going outside and getting my feet in the ground or just like taking a walk around the block or with my dogs. Just extracting myself from the house in general, which a lot of us since the pandemic have really become like stuck into. And when you're doing everything in the same place, that context switching can feel really hard. So for me, just like changing my environment and then returning, I already have like fresh eyes. Another nervous system reset that I love to do is simply taking 3 deep breaths, like very long, deep breaths. And it sounds so simple, but it can be really, really helpful. And finally, aside from, dancing or meditating or whatever everyone else tries to do, sometimes we get so nervous meeting the page because we don't know what we're going to write about. And that might just be because you are a different kind of processor. So something I've been experimenting with is just doodling in front of my laptop before I'm about to write and kind of seeing like what ideas come up. Sometimes I have a prompt in mind, sometimes I don't. But it lets my body be a little bit busy and train it to get typing before I even start doing it. And all those things are incredibly simple. And I know you probably have so many other ideas for resetting your nervous system, but these are some of my favorites.
Those are such incredible suggestions. And just like with everything we're talking about today, there is no one size fits all approach. And it's really about experimenting and discovering what do you need to do to reset your nervous system. But one thing I want to just add in favor of this strategy, of this step 2, is the calmer and more regulated your nervous system is, the safer your creative self feels to come out and play. And if you go into trying to write or create from a dysregulated space, you are in danger. Your nervous system is in a state of danger. You do not feel safe. And we can't create intuitively when we don't feel safe. So I love how explicit in your system, Zafira, calming the nervous system is, resetting the nervous system is. It feels like a step that most of the books out there that talk about creativity miss entirely. So the first step is we're going to establish this ritual. We're going to create the space, and we're going to show up with devotion, not with discipline, to the ritual creative space that we are designing for ourselves. The second step is, before we put our fingers to the keyboard or the pen to the page, we're going to reset our nervous system. It could be as simple as 3 deep breaths, or you might need something a little more time-consuming, like a walk around the block or some type of exercise, like something just to really kind of cleanse your body, calm your nervous system. And what is the third step?
So there's a third and a half step, and then potentially a fourth tip. What I will say that I think helps a lot of people get started is writing with a timer where you do not edit yourself. So, and I think that's really crucial, because sometimes we can do all the things and the conditions are perfect, and then we start and we're like, I hate this. I'm going to rewrite it over and over again. So even if it's like 20 minutes, just all you do is write. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be about the dream you had last night. It can be what's happening outside your window. Just let the words flow and allow yourself permission not to edit as you go. And what you'll find by the end of it will be very surprising. So I wanted to mention that. And I think it just ties into the other two a little bit. But my final tip would be, good writers read good books, but they also read really crappy books too. So we've talked about some really smart books on this interview so far. Well, people might not know about what you and I chatted about a lot.
What we really read?
Well, we really read not all the smart things all the time. We read a lot of romance.
When you read smut, let's be honest.
You read smut. And I think really having like a diverse repertoire on your nightstand can be so supportive for your writing practice as well. And like, I personally love to read before I write anything. And I think we know there's so many benefits to reading, but I think, allowing yourself like the lightness of folding yourself into someone else's story and having empathy for other characters. Also, when you do start to develop a writing ritual and then you start focusing on how you want to improve your writing, you'll be looking for clues like that inside the stories of others. And that can be found not just in the popular books on, Oprah's book club or the really smart books at the top of the nonfiction bestseller list. They can also be found in the smut, or they can be found in, fantasy novels, or they can be found in so many different other genres that I think are really, really crucial for anyone who's looking to become a good writer, is to expose yourself to all of it and just be immersed in story. Because as you're telling stories, that's exactly what you're trying to help someone else feel. And it just is so supportive, I think, to your practice. I'm sure you have thoughts on this too.
Oh my gosh. I'm just like, thank you for the permission. I'm being silly, but I'm actually totally serious that I take time to read every day. And I read a lot more fiction than I do nonfiction. And I used to judge myself a lot for it. I used to like, really, anytime I was reading fiction, there would be a voice in the back of my head that was like, you should be working right now. You should be reading something that's helping your work right now. And at some point I got over that. And I was like, no, like, I am a business owner. I run my own business to serve me and my family and to create the most comfortable, creative life for myself possible. So part of what my business is paying me to do is to read this romance novel. Like, this is part of my work. I don't want there to be such a rigid line between my work and my life. I want them to feel very connected, very fluid. And I just feel so inspired when I let myself consume stories and writing from all different angles, all different walks of life. I so deeply believe in what you're saying. And there is so much to learn from craft, and from the craft of people who aren't like you and don't do the same kind of work that you do. And honestly, if I spent all of my time reading like the quote smart people books at the top of the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, I would never write my own stuff because the bar would feel so high. I can get so in my head when I'm reading like the fancy stuff of like, oh, I can never do that, or I can never, I'm never going to create like that. So what's the point of creating at all? Um, it's been a liberating part of my creative practice to give myself permission to consume writing of all genres and really seeking out authors of, different cultures and different walks of life. And it makes me excited to really dive into more of my own creative practice when I feel supported by the collective creativity of all of these different people in the world.
Absolutely. That is so beautifully put. And I think we only stand to benefit. And
Yep.
what I love the most about reading is that unlike the other distractions or outlets we tend to reach for, you can really only focus on that one thing in that one moment.
Yeah.
And that means that if creativity is lingering around you, wanting your attention, it might find you there while you're reading as
Oh my gosh,
well.
yes.
Right? I'm sure you come up with ideas while you're reading a book, even though those two things might not have been connected. And so I often have like a notepad with me, or, I'll pop something into an iPhone note that comes up as I'm reading. But I think we don't have access to a lot nowadays that lets us enjoy something just for that one thing. Even when we're watching TV or whatever, we're double screening, we're
Right.
getting up, we're making food, or like we're doing stuff. But reading really feels like texting. It feels like one of the few things I really have to protect, and like I want to just hold sacred, and I have totally read a book with the phone in my hand, and I'm like, this is just not the same.
Yeah.
I have to put it away. You have to
Yeah.
put it away. And it feels so good.
And I love just this reminder that it's okay to do things that are mindless.
Yeah.
It's important even because my mind is full a lot. I'm always like turning something over in my head or thinking about my work or my clients or what's coming next in my business. And it's hard for me just to be like, okay, I'm just not going to think about that anymore. Like my mind needs something else to do or to think about. So I like pulling in books that are fantasy set in a whole other world where my mind has to let go of the stress of my own life in order to understand literally like what is happening in this story, or reading like a contemporary romance that is just like sweet and gentle and easy to digest, and it's like a palate cleanser for my frontal lobe. It's like, let's just be in this
Yes.
world for a little while. And if reading isn't the thing for you, if it's music, if it's dancing, like whatever it is, great. Do it, create the space for it, commit to it, and really trust that your greatest creative ideas exist on the other side of you creating space just to be with yourself in a gentler way.
Mic drop. So good.
Oh, this is so inspiring, Zafira. I am so inspired by you, by the way that you help business owners find their creative spirits, develop their own writing practices. It's really magical. And I just feel so lucky that I met you at that random party in New York City this summer. It's been such a gift connecting with you. And I have one more question for you before we wrap up today. One of the themes this season in Rest and Success Code is really about helping people define what it means for them to be wildly successful as business owners. And it's really easy to say money, okay, how much money I make is how successful I am. And I'm not discounting that that's an important part of the equation. But like I said earlier, time to read novels is one of the variables that I measure when I'm really looking at how successful am I in my business and my life right now. And I would love to hear from you. what is something that your business does for you? What is a creative way your business pays you that makes you feel wildly successful?
Ooh, this is such a good question. I think it definitely pays me in access to flexible time.
Yeah.
And my calendar feels very malleable in a way that I think having a job would just not do for me.
Mhm.
And also knowing that I work with other entrepreneurs who get it and are also equally malleable and have been there. So, especially since I have become a mother, I'd never realized how important that would be for me. And I had never really planned, this journey. So, having access to that is something I am so, so grateful for. And that I am just would not compromise for anything in the world. And even if business is having a hard time or it's having a good time, it's knowing that I have ownership over what that time looks like that I am eternally so grateful for.
Wow. Thank you. I think time flexibility is one of the most precious things that we have access to as business owners. And it's one of the things that we are the quickest to give away when things feel hard or we feel stressed. And what you just said is such a powerful reminder that we are in control. And whether things are going great in our business or they're going terribly, we have the ability to choose how we spend our time. And if that isn't what it means to be wildly successful, I don't know what is. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you too. This was such a delight.
If you loved this conversation with Zafira, I would be so grateful if you could take 5 minutes to write a quick 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us so much in sharing the deeply rested message with more entrepreneurs. And if you want to learn more from Zafira, you can sign up for her free 30-day writing challenge. What would happen if you wrote just a little bit every day for a month? Download a selection of curated writing prompts to turn to when you're ready to journal or pin your next piece of content. Sign up for free at zafirarajan.com/writing-challenge. That's ZAFIRARAJAN.com/writing-challenge. Thank you so much for listening to Deeply Rested. Can't wait to talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.